What's up, everybody? Peter X is Okafor here. Uh, Welcome to my monthly podcast called Three Things, and this is for July 2023. My three things. Billboard charts got basically pretty scientific a lot later than you thought. Get to that in a minute. Number two, no genre never dies. And number three, I ran across some interesting Spotify list called Rat Punk. Yes, there's a marriage going on there. So those are the topics we're covering. So let's first start with the Billboard charts. And I finally have worked my way through and Party Every Day by Larry Harris. And Larry was the nephew for the great Neil Bogart, who did Casablanca, who started and ran Casablanca Records through the disco era, had Parliament on the label and Kiss, and Donna Summer, and various other disco artists. So they were a big thing back there, and then in the late '70s, they sold a lot of records. So I was a little surprised when I learned that, Billboard's charts didn't get scientific until 92. And think about it. I mean, before then, a lot of the charts were based on self-reporting by labels. So, I mean, come on. The record industry, the music industry is shady as hell, has always been shady as hell. So, let's just say that, the number one album for a given week wasn't always the number one album for the given week. It's interesting, Elvis fans say Elvis probably sold 1 billion records because, it wasn't tabulated at all back then, in the 50s. And we need, and to be fair, I mean, nobody has a real clue outside the U.S. how many albums and singles Elvis sold. And it was more singles than albums because the albums really didn't become a thing until the late '50s, and that's when Elvis was in the army and whatnot. And Elvis still nostalgia sold a lot in the '60s, and then he came back and had that run again in the early '70s. But I talked about this in Elvis and Branding, that Elvis was, there was not a distribution network before Elvis. And, Elvis is the king because of Elvis, you had to build a nationwide distribution network for records. I mean, everything was very, very regionalized, and maybe, a label distributed in 2 or 3 states before Elvis came along. So did Elvis sell 1 billion records worldwide? Probably not, because, the distribution network wasn't there outside the U.S. But I'm not going to argue with folks that, when you look at the record era, and particularly with singles, I mean, I'm pretty sure, the Elvis outsold the Beatles when it came to the singles. I mean, but the records were, hard to come by. And of course, we know, Colonel Tom was cooking the books on top of that. So, but when it comes to singles, nobody sold as many singles as Elvis. The Beatles, maybe album wise, because they were more album centric, and by the time the albums became big, Elvis was not as big. But interestingly, so Bill Wardlow was in charge of the Billboard charts for many years, and obviously, with the internet coming along, I think what happened in '92 was, the charts gave a lot more weight to the record stores. And I think, also that, they taken account as well for, radio play. So it was, album sales, talking to the labels, in the, this is the early '90s, talking to labels. But, it's sort of a digitized and, all these stores were on the same system. Plus, I mean, the mom and pop shops by the early record shops by the early '90s had basically gone. They were gone. I mean, it was Music Land and Sam Goody and Camera Records and a few more really selling their records by then. And it was easier to, to track radio play by then too. I mean, radio play was more or less, that's when the consolidation of radio stations was happening as well. It's just easier to track. And, uh, the artists and the labels had less, sway or influence about how much they got played by radio. So that's that's the first fun fact. And as I said, and Party of a Day by Larry Harris. That's the book he co-wrote with a couple other folks looking at Casablanca rockers, and there's some interesting historical tidbits. I'm through with that book, so it's fed some very interesting tidbits in this Three Things series. On to number 2, No Genre is Dead. Said this before, jazz is alive and well. I mean, the millennials and Gen Z are doing great things in jazz. As I've said before too, I mean, jazz was the dominant genre before rock and roll came along. I mean, up until, the mid 50s, jazz ruled. I mean, Frank Sinatra is essentially a jazz lounge singer. So the blues, I mean, it's a great blues thing. If you have cable, go to your music choice and listen to your blues. I mean, as most of that is contemporary blues, put out in the last, in the 2000s, and there's a lot of good blues being put out there now. It's a subgenre now. It has its own thing, but it's not, you're not in a, get filthy rich like Taylor Swift or Rihanna or Drake by playing the blues, but it's still a viable, genre. So, but thinking through all that, and I was like, well, the one genre that really has not made it through was doo wop. Well, and then I got to thinking, doo wop's alive and well too. It's interesting when Motown came along, they did a kind of an alternative to doo wop because, doo wop, you had, numerous singers. And then, so the Temptations, they had about 3 main singers. But usually, you only had one singer in a song, and the rest of the members of the group would sing background. So that was a very strong model. I mean, it's the model that the Supremes used, the Four Tops used that. And then in the early '80s, you had the boy bands. You had New Edition, NSYNC, Backstreet Boys, all using that Motown model. But Sly Stone started off in a doo-wop band in the early '60s in the Bay Area, San Francisco, Oakland. He'd have songs, where he would sing and Larry Graham would sing and his brother Freddie would sing and his sister Rose would sing and Miss Robinson, the trumpet player. I can't think of her first name right now, but she, and it was very rare where Sly had a song where, until there's a riot going on, where there weren't multiple singers in the song. P-Funk's another thing. George Clinton. I mean, he had multiple singers in most of his songs as well. And then the Beach Boys. I mean, the harmonies that the Beach Boys used and all that stuff. So yeah, hey, doo-wop lasted into the, into the '70s and then it died. Well, to quote Lee Corso, because I'm a huge college football fan, not so fast, my friend. TLC, I mean, that was you had 3 ladies there. They sang in every single song. That's doo-wop. That's rooted in doo-wop. Blackpink is rooted in doo-wop. And you can go to look at the hip hop chart right now, I bet you, 20% of the songs on there have multiple rappers rapping. That's rooted in Doo Wop. So Doo Wop is alive and well. It ain't gone nowhere. Hip hop is, taking the multiple vocalist thing and ran with it. Drake has mastered, this whole aspect of things. And finally, thing three for the month, punk rap. I'm always, searching for that new thing, and very interesting. Now, a lot of songs in punk rap on that playlist on Spotify wouldn't consider punk, but some of it is, and what they like to do is, distort the drums or the bass. So it's very interesting. It has the rebellious aspect that, punk hip hop that you would expect coming out of punk. And then, the relationship, I mean, there's so many similarities, even though sonically punk and hip hop are very different. They're both minimalist and came out of bare bones and very, very cheap forms of music. I mean, literally you needed a nice record collection and two turntables and some speakers, in early hip hop. And, let's just say, those early punk bands, they weren't, playing on, $1,500 Gibsons or Fender Strats or Fender Telecasters. They were playing on cheap stuff and they were playing cheap drums. And, but the other, the other interesting thing is, in the last 10, 15 years, performance wise, uh, hip hop artists have borrowed a lot from punk. I mean, if you go look at the early punk and the slam dancing and that kind of stuff, and you look at what Travis Scott's doing, Travis Scott just, basically, took the dance moves from punk, and he's not the only hip hop artist that kind of uses that, that dance style or whatever. There's a lot of give and take and the back and forth that people don't talk about when it comes to hip hop and rap. So yeah, I'm going to continue, exploring the world of um, punk rap. I think, and I think that's what it's, what um, the playlist on Spotify are called, but interesting stuff going on there. So, yeah, that's what I have for this month. Next month will be interesting. I already, for August, here I am sitting in August doing July, but, I kind of have an idea what I'm doing. So, come back for that. But thanks for coming through. Got 5 albums of my own on all the streaming services and here on YouTube, and I also have them, pegged here on, my channel. And I got two science fiction fantasy full length novels and a novella on Amazon, and starting to, ramp up my visual artistry, and we'll be showing off some of my covers, showing off some of that as I do these singles that I'll be releasing later in 2023. Uh, my latest album, the 317 Volume 2, I took the picture and I did all of the design work on that. So that's the first album cover I've done by myself. So, anyway, you'll be seeing more of my visual artist skills and, and dabbling in the watercolor and that kind of stuff too. So you gotta work cross genres. It's interesting. Working on one genre affects, what you do in others and sharpens those skills. So thank you for coming through, and see you next episode.